The sample variance and standard deviation are fundamental measures of variation or variety in a data set. We will be using these or some variant of them in almost everything we do. In this video, I go through a step-by-step explanation of how we use the sample variance and sample standard deviation to estimate the population variance and standard deviation. We use a lot of symbols in statistics, and part of the difficulty some people have learning statistics is symbol shock. Whenever you see these, here's what they stand for. An uppercase N is the population size, and a lowercase n is the sample size. Lowercase sigma squared is the population variance, and lowercase s squared is the sample variance. Lowercase sigma is the population standard deviation, and lowercase s is the sample standard deviation. Ideally, we would use this formula to find the sample variance, but there's a problem with this formula. It includes mu, which is the population mean, and we never actually know this value. In order to calculate the population mean, we would need all the data in the population. If we had all this data, we could simply calculate the population variance and standard deviation. We would not have to estimate them using the sample. The solution is to use the sample mean as an estimate of the population mean. However, when we use a sample statistic such as the sample mean to estimate a population parameter, we lose one so-called degree of freedom. The numerator in this formula is called the sum of squares, and the denominator is called the degrees of freedom, n-1 in this case. Since the standard deviation is the square root of the variance, this is the formula used to find the sample standard deviation, which we use to estimate the population standard deviation. So what exactly are degrees of freedom? So here's a simple intuitive explanation. Suppose we have a sample of n equals 3 items, and we find the sample mean to be 5. Since the sample size is 3, this means that the sum of the values in the sample must equal 15. The first observation in the sample can be any number, that is, it's free to vary. So let's say in this example it equals 3. The second observation in the sample can also be any number, so it's also free to vary. The third observation must equal 6. So this problem has 2 degrees of freedom. As a rule of thumb in statistics, every time we estimate a population parameter from a sample, we lose 1 degree of freedom. We can now find the differences between the sample values and the sample mean and square the differences. The sum of the squared differences equals 6. This is the so-called sum of squares. We can now substitute the numbers into the formulas and find the sample variance and sample standard deviation. We will be using standard deviations and variances in many of the problems we work. They are important concepts in statistics. Thanks for watching this video, and please let me know if you have any questions.